Okay, good morning everybody. I'd like to tell you something about a study that we've been doing for the Northern Ireland Environment Agency with myself, Optimise, and FTech consultants from London and RSM Mercure. I've been looking at the economic benefits of protecting the historic environment. Now, a definition of the historic environment largely relates to built heritage. That's, I suppose, the landmark buildings from all eras, such as houses, industrial buildings, castles and forts, such as the Derry walls there, and Tully Castle in Fermanagh on the top right-hand side. Domains, gardens, canals, archaeology, including the rather spooky Janus stone there, for example, on the banks of Lough Erne. Shipwrecks as well, of which Northern Ireland has one of the greatest concentrations in the world. And also mixed cultural heritage natural destinations, such as the famous Causeway Coast there, where you'll find many heritage features such as castles and the like, alongside the most stunning scenery. I think I've included that beach up there, not because there's any heritage, any physical heritage there as such, but it's just such a fantastic beach, isn't it? It's, have to remind yourself that these places exist and it's not raining all the time. Anyway, in pure economic terms, the scope of the project has been to examine the economic returns to the historic environment, the value added in excess of costs and state grants, and the cost effectiveness of policy to protect these assets. Revenue to the sector has included some very significant public grants and subsidies, and that in return provides income for tourism and for the construction sector, for instance, from renovation and reuse of buildings. Now, an important step in any economic analysis is to quantifying the benefits, is to identify the specific share that is due to the historic environment, as opposed, for example, to construction benefits from other types of activity, public regeneration activity. In addition, there are the wider economic and social benefits associated with the historic environment. And these would be comprised of the benefits to individual well-being, for example, the satisfaction that you get from actually visiting some of these sites, various public good benefits to the community, which I'll discuss later in the presentation, and the stimulus to private and public sector expenditure, investment, and regeneration. So starting with some of the conventional economic benefits, in this regard, this includes, firstly, income grants and transfers to the sector. This includes funding and services such as personnel provided by the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, which is worth about £11 million per year. Funding from the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, which would be coming at at £23 million per year. The Heritage Lottery Fund is also an important source of income at around £5 million per year. And there's also grants from the Department of Social Protection worth around about £10 million per year. In addition, of course, the North has the benefit of a well-resourced charitable organisation in the form of the National Trust, whose income is in the region of £5.5 million per year from Northern Ireland. But the expenditure is probably well in excess of that as well. So they have that benefit, I suppose, that we do not. And as I've noted, the heritage, the historic environment is also an important resource for tourism. Now, in this respect, Northern Ireland, of course, has been at something of a disadvantage compared with other parts of the UK and with Ireland. The tourist sector is growing very rapidly, but of course it's recovering still from events in its recent past. Nevertheless, tourism revenue is worth about £335 million per year, based mainly on the income from visits from people from the rest of the UK and from the Republic. And using approximate visitor numbers, we've estimated the share of tourists visiting historic features at around about 25%. That is to say that historic features feature in about 25% of visits by tourists from abroad or from Ireland. And the spend for that is around about £84 million per year. However, visitors are rarely dedicated to the historic environment alone. So the estimate includes some of the mixed historic and natural heritage destinations, such as the Causeway Coast, which has some very fine landscapes, of course, not least the Giant's Causeway, but also many historic features such as Dunluce Castle, Carrickfergus Castle, or the Carrick-a-Reid Road Bridge, very, very well-known features. And this tourism income has a multiplier effect as well as it spreads through the rest of the economy, for example, through purchases of input to the sector, And this we've estimated at around about 50% of the tourism income. In addition, there's domestic trips by Northern Ireland residents. Now, this is a very important component. There's about 230,000 such trips a year, representing 68% of visits. So you can see the domestic side is very important in overall tourism terms. And even in entrance fees alone, those visits would be worth about £21 million per year. Now, we haven't included this spending by Northern Ireland residents in the equation because of the displacement effect exists, whereby these people might be spending their money elsewhere in the economy. However, domestic tourism is a very significant share, as I've said, and I'd argue that there is a net additional expenditure, as the alternative could be just sitting on your couch and doing nothing and spending nothing. So having the historic environment there does actually add something. It's maybe difficult to discern exactly what that is. And thirdly, the historic environment makes a very significant contribution to the construction sector, primarily through expenditure on rehabilitation and maintenance of buildings. In this case, there's no published figures to demonstrate the share that's due to historic buildings. On the basis of similar estimates for studies that have been compiled for Scotland and Wales, RSM have estimated that the benefits are around about £512 million per year, or £470 million per year if you adjust for the double counting due to the grants to that sector. And that's a very significant figure, and notice one that's much more significant than tourism alone at the moment in Northern Ireland. And the sector is also very input dependent, so it also includes a very substantial multiplier effect of up to 1.95 times the direct income to the sector. So if you add all these things together, you have state and NGO transfers of around about £60 million per year, tourism income to the historic environment coming out at about £84 million per year, construction income net of about £470 million per year, altogether making for a total of £614 million per year. If we just make adjustments for leakage outside the sector, for instance, imports from abroad, but also for displacement effects, then you come to about a net figure of about £482 million per year. But to that you can add a multiplier effect of the impact as it spreads through the rest of the economy, which brings the total up to about £773 million per year, and a gross value added of about £360 million per year. The boring conventional economic assessment out of the way, what I also wanted to show is that a large share of those benefits depend on what we call wider social and economic benefits. And this list includes giving people a sense of place, identity and pride in their environment, especially in a time of could be anywhere sort of shopping streets that David was describing and main street frontages. And to the extent that this is shared, it also provides for community cohesion as well. It could be strengthened through people's actual participation in heritage conservation, and helping to ensure that heritage isn't viewed as something that is separate and elitist, but is something that actually everybody has a part in, everyone has a stake in. Access and learning, as you can imagine, is also quite an important economic benefit, because people are learning about their history, and that's a very important resource, not just for schools, but also for everybody in terms of learning about their historic origins and the community.